I'm not kidding or exaggerating when I say that today's episode is going to go down as one of the most memorable in the franchise. But the best part is that, even with everything we saw, this isn't the best episode this fourth season has to offer. Personally, there are 3 other moments I consider better, but we'll get to that. And of course, there was also cut content like the amnesiac Subaru's feelings for the witch, which are very similar to the feelings the original Subaru held for this same entity. And it's totally normal if you have no idea what I'm talking about because that was also cut. But before we start, a big thank you to the channel members. Thanks to Dylan, the official Subaru, Thimaranazzo, Santiago, Agus, Jote, Zevin, Noodles, and Marcos. As for my English channel, I don't know if Matas subscribed twice with his 2 accounts. But if so, thank you very much. And if not, it's a strange coincidence that 2 users with the same name subscribed at the same time. But now, let's get started with the video. Welcome to all the cut content from episode 8 of the 4th season of ReZero. In the first scene with everyone in the room, they don't leave out anything really interesting. They only omit Subaru's mentions about how beautiful the girls in this new world are and how good they smell. At least, he just thought this and didn't say it out loud. Afterward, he thinks of Amelia as the girl who will be the heroine and of Beatrice as the mascot. Basically, Subaru being cringy, as always. Though just between you and me, I have to admit that the anime adaptation made me realize how truly sad Betty got about the situation at this moment, since Subaru forgetting things also made him forget the contract he made with her. I know the novel makes it clear too, but for some reason, it's a detail I didn't catch back then and could barely notice in the anime. So if you've already read the novel, I would strongly suggest watching the anime. You never know how your understanding of things might improve. Later, in the scene where they break the news about Subaru's memory loss, the protagonist admits that everyone in this world is beautiful and regrets that his appearance lowers the average. Then, another thing that was omitted, though it's understandable why it was removed, is Shaula repeating that this makes it several times now that her master has forgotten her. I know this was already said in episode 3 and that's why they didn't repeat it, but personally, I would have left it in so the viewer could keep seeing those connections between Subaru and Flugel. Another thing that was also lost due to the cuts, but it doesn't matter because you can figure it out, is how every time people talk about Subaru, they do so with admiration or speaking highly of his past version. And this slowly starts making the amnesiac Subaru see his past self as someone different from him. At least the thoughts in the novel make it clear, but I'm sure any anime viewer can understand it. Afterward, something that helps us better remember that this Subaru had rock-bottom self-esteem, unlike the usual Subaru, is when Amelia wanted to explain the kind of relationship they both had. Subaru asked if they were dating, but she denies it, to which Subaru says he already expected as much. But let's leave the trivial details behind and go for the most important ones. When Subaru is left alone with Ram, Subaru asks her why Julius acted that way, to which Ram tells him that his act is very cruel, which obviously confuses the amnesiac Subaru because he isn't aware of the bonds he formed with the knight. Faced with Subaru's denial that he isn't faking having forgotten things, Ram looks like she considers threatening or torturing Subaru, and thank goodness she didn't because it would have complicated things for the protagonist. Then, when they finish arguing before returning to the room, Subaru hears someone inside saying that he wouldn't joke about having lost his memories, and the person who defended him was Amelia. I consider that this really shouldn't have been omitted, and that's because it helped make it clear that from the amnesiac Subaru's very first loop, not everyone completely believed his story about losing his memories. And keep in mind, this would be the loop where they believe him the most. So now imagine the other loops where not everyone believes Subaru's acts. Another thing that was omitted is a reaction from the amnesiac Subaru to Julius's comment, specifically the one you see on screen. In that part, Subaru reacts by saying that for some reason, the way Julius says every word annoys him. This being a reference, obviously, to his usual clashes with the Forgotten Knight. Also, the reveal of Eridna being Anastasia had more impact and caused more of a stir in the novel. They spent much more time talking about it there than what was seen in the anime. But in broad strokes, what was omitted was the amnesiac Subaru thinking about how his past self could have had access to such confidential information. The comparison made by Amelia comparing a contract with a spirit to having a family was also omitted, and Ram throwing jabs at the amnesiac Subaru every single second because of the situation. Another dialogue between Julius and the others was omitted, where they say that they are partly interested in knowing what caused Subaru to lose his memories, since they wouldn't want it to happen to anyone else in the group. Unfortunately, this omitted detail came with dialogues from the other characters who started listing how helpful the original Subaru was to get to the point where they were now. While those comments were being said, Subaru couldn't help but think again about how cool his past version was and doubted he could measure up. Although after the meal, the anime shows us that the main characters went to the library and left Subaru right outside the dining hall. In reality, it wasn't like that in the novel. They also went with Subaru to the library, and once they found no clues as to how Subaru lost his memory, only then does Subaru temporarily step away from the group, and his death would happen just like we saw. Remember I told you that the comments from the others highlighting the original Subaru's achievements were cut a whole lot? Well, because those comments were omitted, the anime had to cut the scene that gave a conclusion to those thoughts. Right now, I will play the scene, but I think you can understand it just by keeping the context in mind. The context that the amnesiac Subaru struggles to believe his past version did great things for these people, and how highly they think of him.
For some reason, nobody trusted Natsuki Subaru to just sit still and behave himself. He looked around for some support, but found that Julius, Echidna, Beatrice and Ram completely agreed with Emilia and had no intention of throwing him a lifeline. After that short conversation, the investigation and exploration of the Taigeta library began, leaving Subaru with nothing to do except hug his knees and wait for good news. In that state, the young man reflected to himself that he felt guilty, comparing his situation to someone pretending to be sick to skip an important exam. Maylee, who was leaning against a bookshelf beside him while watching everyone get to work, said she did not understand the comparison and did not think it fit very well either. Subaru looked at her while she played with her braid, tilted his head, and asked if she was not going to help the others. The girl explained that she would not join them because she was not really one of their companions. When Subaru asked what she meant, Maylee reminded him that she was an assassin, although she added that since she had failed her mission, she was more like a former assassin now. She explained that she had originally been sent there only to help a little, and that help was already over. Subaru understood that this was basically the condition of her release, commenting that whether she was a former assassin or not, bringing an assassin along as one of their companions was a pretty bold decision. That made Maylee cover her mouth and laugh foolishly while admitting that anyone who did that really had to be crazy, ending the conversation there. Subaru shrugged and looked somewhere else, noticing that Shaula was also waiting around, without making any effort to help Emilia and the others. He told her that he understood why Maylee would not go with them, but wanted to know what her reason was. Shaula openly declared that she was useless, explaining that she could not read or write anything, which made her super useless for that kind of task. That made Subaru wonder how she had ever ended up being called a sage, asking himself if the auto-translator had completely messed up that word. At that moment, Shaula quietly moved closer and tried to snuggle against his arm, making him quickly push her away, while his cheeks burned from the soft feeling that had wrapped around him. Shaula pouted in protest, complaining that Master was super cruel. Subaru defended himself by saying he was not and asked her to stop, arguing that girls should not do things like that except with the guy they liked. He even added that the guy they chose would also pull away if they surprised him like that. Shaula simply replied that it was another lecture about women's dignity, concluding that Master really never changed. Hearing that, Subaru lowered his eyes awkwardly and timidly asked if she also thought he had not changed. That was something people had repeated to him in many different ways during the few hours since he had woken up, and while it was comforting, it also felt like a curse, making him feel as if everyone was playing a game of spot, the difference between him and a Natsuki Subaru he did not know. Shaula simply ignored his worries by saying she did not understand, which made Subaru's shoulders slump in disappointment, as he muttered that he felt like an idiot for asking her. However, Shaula argued that whether he had changed or not, Master was still Master, so she thought it did not matter. She assured him that as long as he freely did whatever he wanted, she would simply follow him. Subaru asked if she would still do that even if strange things happened because of it, and Shaula enthusiastically shouted yes, saying that even if they ended up trapped in super weird situations, she could always force a way out. She finished by saying that even if Master was forgetful, that was still the super relationship they had together. Subaru's eyes widened because he could not sense even the slightest trace of hidden intentions in that honest answer. The moment her true feelings hit him, he quickly looked away from Shaula so she would not see his face, but that only made Maylee call out to him in confusion, forcing him to turn in the opposite direction just as quickly. Cornered by Shaula, who asked what was wrong with him, Subaru cursed under his breath and with nowhere else left to run, buried his head between his knees so neither of them could see the expression on his face. Even though he could feel the two of them looking at each other, he could not bring himself to lift his head. Deep down he thought they probably could not notice it, and he did not want them to know. Shaola's careless and completely open response had been a huge relief, her shameless attitude proving more meaningful than any speech, telling him not to worry so much about losing his memories. Above him, Meili commented that her brother was weird, and Shaola agreed, saying that Master had always been super weird, but added that she liked that about him too. With his head still buried, Subaru could not comment on their exchange, but he felt as though the sense of urgency weighing on his mind had lessened, even if only a little. It was only a few minutes later that Emilia and the others returned from the archive, looking defeated, with nothing to report.
Something I couldn't mention before is that even before the extract I just played for you, Shala had already informed the amnesiac Subaru about the rules of the tower, unlike the anime version where it seems he will have to find out some other way. But getting back to the topic, only after these thoughts would the group discuss in the dining hall again whether they should prioritize recovering Subaru's memories or continue with the tower trials. And that's where Subaru would go to the passageway and get pushed by someone, thus ending his first loop. At the start of the second loop in today's episode, nothing relevant was cut. Maybe just the amnesiac Subaru's suspicion that the library had altered his memories and that he didn't actually fall, or also the suspicion he came up with upon seeing Emilia and Biko react to him having lost his memories when they supposedly should already know, leading him to think that maybe the tower was erasing everyone's memory. Afterward, although the characters go back to the library without Subaru, in reality, that only happened in the anime. In the novel, they go with Subaru over there, but again, they cut this due to time and adaptation reasons. In reality, that conversation between Shaola, Meili, and Subaru happens in the library, and the only thing omitted was that after Meili asks him if he really doesn't remember anything from yesterday, only then did she say that Petra would be sad to know he forgot everything. Honestly, this comment from Meili brings back to mind the video I made about the biggest theory of Arc 6, which I recommend watching if you don't mind spoilers, because today something exactly happened that lets you understand a big part of it. But leaving the shameless spam aside, although we later see Subaru listening to the others doubt him, something that was omitted and made the amnesiac Subaru's situation heavier was a line from Meili also sharing her doubts about him. I want to clarify that at no point is what I'm about to say explicitly stated, but seeing how Subaru realizes the bonds he formed are quickly forgotten or aren't as deep as he thought, it really reminded me a lot of Arc 2, the arc where Subaru first met Rem and Ram. Personally, I find a lot, and I mean a lot, of similarities between the Subaru of now and the Subaru from that time, but of course, now it's much harder because there are more people. Another thing I must mention is that there is way too much introspection from the amnesiac Subaru. Introspection where he thinks about how confusing the situation is, how he feels, and how he can't help but feel like a thief for wanting to have the bonds that his past version had. In fact, something I remember people saying before Arc 6 was adapted was that fans wanted a narrator to say all these lines of thought. At the time, I thought they were exaggerating, but now that I look at this in detail and see that there really is a lot of introspection, I understand why the fandom said that once. Even so, I think the anime did a good adaptation of the thoughts, but at least that's my perspective, though I wouldn't trust my words too much because since I know the story a bit better than average, maybe I'm already biased, but I'm interested in knowing the anime viewer's opinion. Can you guys really feel the scale of Subaru's despair and helplessness regarding the complex he forces upon himself because of his past version? Leave it for me in the comments. Lastly, when Subaru falls into the void, two voices are heard. One voice we have already heard in the past, spoken by Louis Arneb, and the other voice is that of Subaru himself. But as I promoted a moment ago, that voice is connected to the theory in the Arc 6 video, so consider watching it afterward. Before moving to the next loop, I want to point out that I liked how the author represented Subaru's fall in the novel, and he did it in this way as you can see on screen. Afterwards, Subaru's third loop would begin, which honestly is a bit different in the novel, but only in the way he reacts. It's said that Subaru crawls out of the place out of despair and how he starts throwing up, but by far something that even I hadn't noticed when reading the novel is that Subaru slaps Beatrice. Seeing Subaru hitting women reminds me of what he did to Echidna in the Kasaneru light novel. After that, the anime is pretty much faithful in its entirety with what follows. Sure, Reed told him a few more words and the memories of his parents were a bit longer, but the essence is kept. It's also said that when he is pushed by Reed, he starts hallucinating that death is coming for him, and he stands up to answer back to the imaginary entity. And because he tells it that he has returned from death, that's when the witch appears and punishes him. What I do feel was lost, and it's a shame, are the thoughts Subaru has during his brief meeting with the witch. They are thoughts that honestly are better for you to hear.
Just as he was about to speak, Subaru's lips stopped moving the way he wanted, and his eyes, fixed on death, lost all ability to react. He felt himself lose complete control over his body, trapped in a paralysis that prevented him from even trying to understand the reason for his condition, leaving him with nothing to do except wait for some kind of change. He realized that it was not his body that had failed, but the entire world itself that had stopped, including the death standing before him, whose expression remained twisted with rage. Within that frozen space, the only thing still moving was a figure that was probably a woman dressed in black. She had slender limbs and was wrapped in absolute darkness, a pure blackness where it was impossible to tell whether the color itself gave her shape or if it was simply her clothing, though to him the difference no longer mattered. She seemed to wear a dark dress and a veil that completely hid her face. Despite her appearance, the woman's lips whispered with endless tenderness that she loved him. Those words carried an emotional weight beyond imagination, an intensity so immense that no matter how many times the rest of humanity spoke such feelings, they could never compare to the power behind hers. That love possessed a quality, a quantity, a weight and a value that went beyond any human concept known to him. Slowly, the woman extended her dark arm towards Subaru's chest. Her thin fingers passed through skin, flesh, and bone with disturbing softness, directly caressing his beating heart. For what felt like minutes, or maybe dozens of them, Subaru remained fully aware of her presence, and to his own surprise, he realized he had never hated her. She touched his heart with the same passion carried in her whispers. Suddenly, a devastating impact ran through him, and his body collapsed beneath the terror of the pain. The feeling of being shattered by the fall, his soul burning outside his existence, and the guilt tied to the memory of his mother all became meaningless compared to the suffering he felt at that moment. Subaru desperately wished she would at least allow him to scream, believing that crying out until his voice broke might lessen even a fraction of the agony and let him escape from the pure pain, but he could not. The woman whispered once more that she loved him, a love that instead of freeing his heart felt like endless and possessive greed, as if she envied everything around him and refused to let him focus on anything except her alone. At last, release came without warning. After letting out a shaky breath, Subaru collapsed where he stood. Through tears, he lost all control of his body, and unable to hold himself together any longer, urine began dripping down the stairs because he had completely lost control of himself.
As we can see, Subaru's thoughts about the witch are interesting since he doesn't claim he hates her even though she's hurting him. It's curious how the original Subaru showed the same feelings for her as the amnesiac Subaru. This supports the theory of Subaru's sealed memories, and that's why he can't help but love Satella or the witch. Anyway, getting back to today's video, the anime adapts the rest the best way it could. While Subaru's thoughts were inevitably cut, you can already get an idea of what he was feeling in these frames. I'll just tell you that if the Subaru in the anime looked like he wanted to end it all, believe me, the one in the novel is in another level of despair. Later, when he is left alone, he starts planning his escape while complaining that he has to carry the killing intent directed at the previous Natsuki Subaru. There, he starts planning to steal supplies for the trip with the goal of fleeing to a town where he could get away from everyone while wishing to see his parents again. He opens the front door, and upon leaving the place, the rule is broken, transforming Shola, and the episode ends. Honestly, the episode was great. Not much was omitted, and if it was, you can easily fill in the unsaid things or feelings with your head. Of course, there were things that were inevitably lost, like the amnesiac Subaru's feelings for Satella, but not everything is perfect. Though I must thank the anime for giving me a better look at Subaru's deaths in these loops, the idea I had has changed drastically, and I hope the anime keeps surprising me this way. Probably the next episode will finish the current volume, and while they would have to adapt almost 170 pages for this, unlike the nearly 100 they adapted today, I trust that the quota can be met without hurting the story too much. I trust that since we are at a point where internal thoughts take up a lot of the novel and not so much in the animation, hopefully I'm not wrong. Although while I was writing this, some news just came out that invalidates everything I'm saying, but in a good way. It seems the next episode will cover less than I expected. I don't want to go into details because that would be a spoiler, so I'd ask you to go check the tweet on screen if you want the full context. Personally, I just have to say that this new cut before the break feels a bit weird in reality, since it would have been much better if we closed with the final scene of Volume 23, a scene that is very beautiful and I'm not putting here to avoid spoiling the user. But let's move on to the author's tweets. First, the author emphasizes how Amelia and Betty struggle to keep up appearances facing Subaru's memory loss. Second, the author emphasizes how Subaru's eyes have a spark inside them, which is the same spark Subaru had in episode 1 of the first season when he believed his life in this world would be fun. Third, the author explains why Ram is affected so much by Subaru losing his memory, and that's because now that he forgot Rem, she doesn't know how she should feel regarding her sister. This honestly confuses me a bit. I mean, if she doesn't know how to feel regarding her sister, isn't it enough to just be understanding and loving? Anyway, maybe it was just the heat of the moment. Fourth, the author gives a clue so the anime viewer can figure out what could have happened to Subaru. Fifth, while I laughed at the part where Subaru gives Betty a little hit, the author condemned his literary son's action, and those would be the most interesting tweets. I remind you that there are actually more tweets. It's just that some are trivial and without anything interesting involved. What I do here is put the ones that are most interesting to me or the ones that reveal lore stuff. Either way, I invite you to check the full list if you want to. But let's talk about today's break time. This week's break time is an interesting one, and one that I'm not kidding when I say I didn't expect to happen. Why? Because it mixes two different moments. It seems this chapter takes place right after Julius and Eridna argue with Subaru the night before, and there Eridna references the events that happened in the side story where Anna ended up meeting her many years ago. Probably if you watch this, you already know the context of what was talked about, so I'll just give a bit more information on what was happening at that time. It's said that around those years, Anna was already working as an assistant secretary to the owner of the Chuden company, a company that Anna would eventually buy out and hire her old boss as her assistant. And at that time, she was on that mission looking for something that was going to allow her to win the eternal favor of Mimi and her siblings, and of their adoptive father. In fact, here Anna and Ricardo face one of Capella's children who is looking for Eridna. Unfortunately, the fight is a bit long and doesn't fit into a short format, and while I considered animating it, it's like for that I would have to commission GIFs of the characters that appear in this part, so I'm sorry, but for now I won't cover this story. Maybe later on when I finish the videos I owe. Plus, I remind you that I already uploaded the video of Helene's torture that I promised in another video. But that has been all for today. I hope you liked this video, and if so, don't forget to leave your like and comment to encourage the algorithm to support my channel. See ya!